1871. When those of you who know about some of the operative political body politic operations operating at North America, you will be familiar with what is known as the Organic Act of Congress of 1871, and most scholars and peoples who teach civics are well aware of that official operations of de facto political platforms. Now, operatively, in order to write themselves into the history of the Asiatics here at the North Gate, many among the hybrid Europeans, coming from most of what they would call the dross class, coming from the Iberian Peninsula that you know as Europe today, etc. And thereafter, particularly after the 1800s, but much of the battles that have taken place on the land since the 1700s, etc., has been in the what you would call stage by stage eventual overthrow of the Moorish Empire at the Maghreb or the Western Hemisphere, generally referred to in history books as the colonization of North America. That's the cover for the colonization and the conquest of the Maghreb, or what is known as the Red House, also referred to as Casablanca, also referred to as Humpty Dumpty. But we're going to go into some of their operative psychology, and it integrated within their operations. It must be comprehended and must be overstood and understood by the people that the hybrid Europeans who have been operating for the last couple hundred years at North America in a de facto pseudo sovereign authoritative position, much of their authority or jurisdictional powers comes from conquest, therefore de facto, unconstitutional, therefore de facto, in breach of treaties, therefore de facto. However, to the degree that they have been making decisions politically, socially, and economically that has not only affected we Moors of the North Gate, but also other nations and tribes on the planet due to their hegemony operations, also using in the nature of their operations dark magic, human trafficking, pedophilia, flesh eating, etc. Negative vibrations used through all scientific methods and tools, etc. However, it's important for people who are less than aware of what's actually at the root of the politics operating at North America to be aware of one of their main tools that have been used by the hybrid Europeans who have conquered the Moors of the North Gate, but also it's being presented for the people to be aware that the energies and the psychosis that have come from these operations is also dying. So when you see, or as you see the people around the planet awakening or reawakening to a cognizance that's related to the ancient Hykupto, ancient Egypt, ancient Africa, Asia, and those principles, it has more to do with people becoming aware of the negative dark tools that have been used to suppress them. And to that degree, and on that note, we're sharing some of the Christian Black Codes of 1724, and many of you who are already aware of it or of those codes are aware of some of the entries and the psychoses that are placed within it, and also the psychic attacks, the points are made for mind control, for breaking up families, etc. And we're going to hit on all of them. In the Christian Black Codes of 1724, there's 54 articles, basically. But we're going to go through a few of them so you can look at some of the social engineering that you see going on every day and understand and comprehend much of their motivations, much of the de facto legislation that takes place in and among those who are part of the demo operations of the Kaiklos and Ku Klux Klan operations, which you know today as the Cotton Wigs and the Conscience Wigs, who are veiled in what is known as the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, operating on the land in a de facto structure at North America. In the fact of the matter, from a true political perspective, that is their own private human trafficking political platforms, which have no what you call honor relationship to us, the people of the land. However, because it affects us, and because the fundamentals of the Constitution for the United States is derived from our fatwa, or the fatwa principles of the Honor Honesty Confederation of Moors to the north, etc., which you will be told in history is Iqua. It concerns us also because within the confines or the construct of the Constitution for the United States is their obligations to all treaties, etc., which comprises the actual supreme law of the land, all of which has been breached and is consistently being breached. However, we are going through the Constantinian code systems just to make you aware of some of their psychology. So we're going to read some of them and make some comments in between to how we might say reawaking some of those who are still sleeping, so that we can be better prepared to start looking in the areas among our people with proper civics and self-determination, which would be right of sovereign self-government, etc., which is necessary for our people to re-qualify themselves for self-government. And so you must know some of the acts of your enemies in order to not be distracted by false paradigms and what they may call false flags that are put in place to distract you, whether they're social, political, or economic. So awareness of motivations of the chess game of life that's being played at North America, it is good to have a comprehension of some of the tools that are being used by the de facto politicians. Was there something you want to ask me, Doctor?
Yeah, there's a question, and I don't want to miss it, just get there earlier, from Divine Sovereign. How do we hold them accountable for breaching the treaty?
By holding yourself accountable to it. I know that sounds to some people like a diverted answer, but that in fact that is what it is. And it's back to understanding that they are de facto. That's number one, and that they're as it would say in the Septuaginta or the Bible, there's no truth in them. Those who have taken over the honorable treaties and Constitution for the United States are actually operating in adverse position to the Republic principle that is at the root of that Constitution and treaty. So that must be understood. Now we must also look at the fact that our people, the Aboriginals at North America, for the most part, who have been engineered, socially engineered under the Christian black codes have not been harmonic with the law of the land themselves, as opposed to an assumption that just the hybrids have been in breach of constitutional principles. Keep in mind, the Constitution principles are more ancient than that document. That must be understood. And those principles come from Muslim law that actually come from Saba law or the Sabian Moors, etc., what you would call the ancient Coptic or Kupta Coptic Christians, etc. So you need to understand many truths that are about the culture of the people here that has not been taught generally, so that you don't get caught in the schisms that are also put in place to divide us among each other. So a lot of people will look at the fact of many of the Moors at the Maghreb being Muslim and not be aware of the fact that Muslims or Islam is actually a sect of the Coptic Sabian or Sabian Moors, what you might call, with a cover up. This is a cover up, the word Jew, which is a fiction cover up to cover up Saba, which is really covering up the Sabian Moors, which is the foundation of religion on the planet, period. That's the truth. And so because people haven't been taught the truth about the history of religion, people think that when you use the different sectoral terms like Muslim, Christian, and Jew, that you're talking about totally, from a narrative point of view, totally different philosophies, when actually they all have the same root. But by people not knowing the real history, they're caught into the schism and take the position that they must take one side or the other in order to prove themselves worthy, when that is a false narrative that also must be corrected. And the other thing that must be corrected, when we're reading the Christian Black Codes of 1724, you must also be aware of the fact that many of the hybrid Europeans who have conquered the Western Hemisphere and have been on a tear to conquer the rest of the Asiatic world, particularly for the last couple hundred years, that they, for the most part, are not Christians at all. They use it as a front. Most of them are, in fact, Niceno-Constantinian operatives who have been using Christianity as a front for their operations. So that must be comprehended by the people, because a lot of people don't know that. And so when you're loosely using these terms, Christian, Muslim, and Jew, without knowing the background or the origins, we have a tendency to fall into the divisions and schisms that are part of the mind control and the psychic attacks that are used to control the people. Now, the closer and the more aware that our people become to the realities of what got us to where we are today, the closer and the more capable you, I, and we as a people will be in our capacity to enforce the law, the supreme law of the land, and of course enforce the treaties, and of course by virtue of that, causing the hybrid occupiers to take a different position, and that's what's going to force them actually to maintain honor or go back to honor for their own political survival. But much of that will be done, and is being done actually right now, from more of an ethereal plane now, as most of those or efforts that have been put forth to bring justice at the North Gate have failed in the third dimensional level, and therefore higher dimensional or planes of life energies are brought to bear, which are operative now. And this is, again, as we're talking about the Christian Black Codes of 1724, it is to let you know that that paradigm is dying. The force and powers that they have had availed to them under the Piscean energy to exercise that successfully, the energy platform that even would allow it to live is dying. And so this is also why we're presenting some of this, is so that you would be willing and more willing yourselves. And this is us. When I'm talking to you, I'm talking to me too, to let it go. Or what some people would say in a metaphorical position, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. You got to remember that the hybrid Europeans who have been operating de facto and breaching all divine law principles on the land and among the people, they have had their jurisdictional powers because we keep giving it to them, or we keep agreeing with them, or we keep trying to participate in dead structures, which you would know as corporate structures, with them, and to be a part of it. And in fact, by virtue of us doing that, we're actually projecting our energies to them, and it is certainly accepted by them, not unlike an innate or an inanimate animate machinery operating from the position of a receptor and a battery. When you stop feeding the beast cannot live. One of the problems that we have, again, is that the people seem to have this idea that the hybrid Europeans have power just because they have guns, or they have power just because they have used technology that they have stolen from ancient Egypt, ancient Egypta, ancient Yucatan, and hid it from the world, and have been back in engineering for a couple of hundred years, and by virtue of that, have put themselves artificially a few hundred years ahead of the rest of the world, and are in fact using that technology, which is really ancient technology, it's not new. So let's get that out of the way immediately. To enslave, and that's connotative, the world, or to make serfs out of the rest of the world, and with their black codes operations and plans to genocide the Aboriginal people before they wake up to the frauds and turn on them. And so from a political perspective, you can not justify, but comprehend a lot of their political motivations for promoting schisms. However, it must also be noted, as you must be aware, with the rest of the Asiatic world, as we've been telling the people for the last 10 to 12 years, that the rest of the civilized world were going to stop buying U.S. Treasury bonds. And as many of you have recalled, 10 to 15 years ago, and more recently, in the 7 or 8 year area of the timeline, by the calendar year, we've been telling people to start disconnecting themselves from the hybrid European corporations, because the nations of the world would stop buying their treasury bonds, which are rooted in the base of their economic operations, particularly since 1862, which is why you will see many of the records of the congressional records, for those of you who do research, will have a lot of blanks in them, because they don't want you to be aware of the fact that that part of those agreements that are made among themselves, particularly the Treaty of Peace and not the Treaty of Peace, the Secret Treaty of Verona operations, as well as the Kyplos operations at North America, in conjunction with the Circle Church and the Chancery operating at Fleet Street in District of London. We're talking the City of London, not London itself, but we call a corporate platform for the bishopric or the dark priesthood, who have called themselves gods of the world. That roughly 1861, late 1861, 1862 is when they started imposing the tithe upon the Aboriginal people to pay off artificial debts that were artificially created, which are to this day referred to falsely as national debt. And so with all that they steal from the people in tithing and they changed the word tithing, tribute, to Rome as tax. And 20%, roughly around 20% of that goes to the British accredited registry operators of members of the Roman Curia, who construct most of the fixed writs that you'll find today with the IRS, as an example, with different organizations like the CIA, FBI, etc., and the funding the war machines that they go to and fro, the earth-devouring nations. The taxes is drawn from the people of the land, as well as some of your naturalized, not nationalized, some of your pseudo-naturalized hybrid Europeans who have come to the North America and who are corporate citizens of the United States, or what they say U.S. citizen, which is a corporate construct and not a nationality. For those, they're also taxed, although their tax burdens are limited, and 20% of that goes to the barristers, etc., which is again why they don't teach the people about the original Constitution for the United States and the treaties, which are conjoined as one unit, etc. So when you're talking constitutional law, constitutional enforcement, you're talking treaty enforcement at the same time. This is again why civics has not taught to conquered peoples, so that you're not aware of the obligations and the burdens of obligations and the obligations to all treaties that exist with those persons that our people have assumed, and that's a quote unquote assumed to be government, when actually they're organized criminals. But again, by our people not being aware of the true history and the true politics and of treaty and constitutional law being conjoined, etc., and the obligations thereto also being on all parties, and by our people being falsely designated as Negroes, blacks, coloreds, etc., Boricane, and all that kind of stuff, Puerto Ricans and Latinos, instead of telling the truth that they are direct descendants of the ancient Canaanite Moabites, and they are the real Aboriginal peoples of the land, and all the tribes here are actually Moors. Moors is just simply short for Al Moroccan, which means American, which means descendants of Moroccans. That's all it means. By us not being aware, and for the most part, for the last few generations, many of our people believing that the black codes was the identity of African peoples, adopted not necessarily willingly, but by customary fad dispensation, adopted the sociological term black, which is not a negative within itself. Understand that that's not a negative. But the term is put in place, or any nomen or designation of identity for a people that's put in place that has nothing to do with the truth of their pedigree, etc., actually takes them out of what is known as heritability, or in the capacity to inherit. So it's important that we fix that with our people, so that they can, by virtue of their own cognizance and consciousness, begin to take their places among the affairs of men and command the enforcement of constitutional principle, which is treaty principle. Keep that in mind. So when you look at the hybrids in violation of treaty, look at the fact that our people have been in violation of the treaty by claiming to be Negroes, blacks, and coloreds, of which they are not. And that's the truth. So again, as we're looking at the Christian Black codes, let's look at some of the motivation of the engineering. And I'll go through, say, 1 to 6. And for those of you who come here and share with us, some of you come on the official site, the official hours of office of with Dr. G official office hours, and also come here sharing with us at the official House of Reawakening Minds, You will be getting both information and inspiration, hopefully, that we take responsibility to evolve and develop our both spiritual and political venues, which are necessary to bring balance, particularly as we move out of this third dimensional, what you would call closeted or fenced in reality, going to the higher planes of life and thus the higher levels of consciousness that come with it by default. And also that we're not blindsided or sideswiped with a lack of comprehension as these higher levels of consciousness pour on the planet at Midgard, which is being also cleaned up, as well as those who are countering the cleanup are trying to dirty up as much as they can. And so you have a dynamics that are taking place where our people are being dug out of the grave of ignorance, and there's others on the other side of the grave of ignorance that is constantly shoveling dirt back in, if you get the point. Good.
Here's a question from Carl QL. Our people, the American Moor, remain asleep because they believe some powerful being is coming from the sky. Will one really come from the sky?
Yes and no.
Because they've already come. They have come from the sky before. They've already done it.
It's sort of like, people will make the statement, will Jesus come again?
Every day.
And yes and no, if you get the whole point. But when you look at it from an anthropomorphic, that's like saying, will the sun shine tomorrow? Well, yes, it will. Somewhere. Will the energies that the sun brings come? Yes, it will. So the purification of the cycles of the sun in relationship to Midgard, or the firmament of Earth, goes through a cleansing period roughly every 36,000 years, roughly. And so when you look at what's going on, the Earth is actually purging right now. So you have a different energy coming from the sun. And you must be harmonic with that to comprehend what's going on and be, competent to handle it. And see, the more you're aware of how the heavens work, the more harmonic you will be with the heavens, and the less, what you might say, damage will be done by the cleansing. That's a default situation. And so when we're looking at, as we're looking at the black codes, which have been in operation at North America, particularly since the 1700s, from an organized governmental perspective, and certainly has had its negative effect as far as destroying the families. This was one of the major goals of the Christian Black Codes, to make the people docile, to destroy our cognate relationship with nature and the workings of nature, to dissolve our families, to get us to reject the divinity principles upon which our civilizations have been structured. And in place of all of this, and not limited to this, is to adopt artificiality on multiple levels, whether you're dealing with artificial intelligence, whether you're dealing with neglecting, ignoring, rejecting the intuitive mind and the intuition and insight that is part of the seeing process, conjoined with the other five senses, which make seven senses in the circle of the head, or the cognates of the head, dealing with the air and the fire, the heat, or the pineal gland, the eyes, the electrical circuitry, the ears, and the taste and the touch, etc., and the conjoining of all of those senses that actually bring you to a higher seeing, which they would call the third eye, or the cyclops, or the third eye, which you would also see as the eye of Horus, symbolic in Central America and also in Hikupta and the territories of Asia and Africa that single eye. This is again why they always give that a negative, so that you don't look at that or have a comprehension of what the message actually is, and is referring to the all-seeing. This is again as the hybrid Europeans took over Asia and Africa, is why they named their Pope the Father, and they named him the Holy See, or which means the Sun See. That's what that means. Sun comes from holy, comes from Hali Sanskrita, which means the sun or the whole or the great sun, etc. in that nature. So holy, when you hear terms like Holy Quran, Holy Bible, Holy Scriptures, you're talking about scriptures of the sun. If you're saying Bible, it comes from Biblos, which is just an area where we printed books. It's really not a name in the sense that people think it is, not named a book. It's really a tech book dealing with sun or equinoxes, but put in an anthropomorphic story form and metaphors. And so when you hear Holy Bible, it means sun book. When you hear a Holy Quran, it means sun reader, etc. But they're all related. The problems that we have is by the priesthood, for selfish cause and selfish reasons, have not told the people in general the truth about some of these things, because it destroys their little, what you would say, money generating platforms by which they've been stealing the widow's pennies for centuries in the name of whichever flavor gods they've been selling to the people without explanation. That's not a condemnation of the people who seriously and honorably have been seeking the Most High, or what we call the Source, or Allah, etc., 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 or the Divine Mother, the Cosmic Mother. All these different names are used to reference the Divine Source, etc. So the priesthood have pretty much made up sectalisms by which they've been living off the poor for generations, but not telling the people the truth about the walk of man, about the nations, the tribes, etc., and the fact that that they have invaded many places and have written themselves into a history of which, in fact, they actually originally have no part, as well as corrupting much of the existing history, and getting many of the people to separate themselves mentally from history, rights and wrongs that are actually their own. For the purpose of conquest, this was done. And so we're talking about some of these things to, number one, to encourage our people to take more responsibility for their lives. Number two, to stop looking up in the heavens for the coming of Jesus, because Jesus symbolically means justice. Metaphorically, it means justice. Etymologically, Jesus, as far as ancient Mesopotamia, ancient Canaan, ancient Moabites, etc. And as you already know, for those who do any research on the one or the character that they refer to as Jesus, you already know that Jesus was Moor. Moor comes from ancient Moabite, etc. And of course, Al-Moroccan comes from that. And so what you have is as you see in the Bible, the one who spoke with a voice of many waters, and his hair was like lamb's wool. So he had woolly hair, that's his antenna, and skin like burnished brass. And so that is the traditional copper color or complexion of the skin that is referred to as the true Al-Moroccan, or the true American. However, the spirit or the energy of justice that comes with that character of Jesus, which is part of the principles of balance in divine law and nature, is represented by the anthropomorphic Jesus. And in fact, Jesus and his grandmother, who you know as Ruth in the Bible, was a Moabite. And so the Moors are direct descendants of the ancient Moabites, And those are the woolly-headed ones, or the ones with the hair like lamb's wool, who are the direct descendants of the ancient Sabians, which you refer to as Saba. And so when you're talking about from the misrepresented perspective of religion, the keeping the Sabbath, you're talking about keeping the principles of the ancient Sabian Moors. So you need to know the origin. And so a lot of our concepts that we have taken as some kind of a worshipful position is not indeed at all that in fact, but is simply a designation of the customs, traditions, and the culture of the ancient ones more than any worshipful thing, although that's usually how it's presented to people in your more modern history books. And so that had more to do with projecting the idea of having the people take a docile position, and this psychosis of looking for the idol gods from outside of themselves to come rescue them from the problems created by the priesthood, who are actually for the most part, a group of men who have been concentrating on their lower selves and have been summoning up demon energy for themselves for world conquest. And so we have the unfortunate situation where most people who have been presenting the what you would say religious codes to the people have not really been teaching the people religion at all. They've been teaching the people dogma systems and tagged it as religion, and in fact have been more practicers of what you call demonology than anything divine or helpful to humanity. And this has much to do with the negative conditions that you see at Midgard that have that the people of Earth have been suffering, for quite some time. And of course, you have people around the planet now as we're going into the higher planes of life, and some will call them dimensions. So as we go into the higher planes of life, and some will refer to it as the coming of the age of Aquarius as an example. All these are metaphors that actually are present to you some of the energy formats and the changes that come with the energy formats, as you would see the planetary movements or the Earth positioning itself in this quadrant of the galaxy, of this particular galaxy, under a total new energy. And so logically, and this is just simply logic, you'll see the sun take a different color, more of a white bright than its traditional, more orangish, yellowish tone or reflections of colors as it goes through the atmosphere of this firmament. And so you must understand that there's, you had, as the Earth went through the Futon belt, you had more resistance, and then you have less resistance as it comes out. So you will have also a waning of the energies expressed on the Earth from the sun. So you will have, your minimals and your maxims relative to the outputs of the sun. And you're getting ready to go into what you might call a restful period. And then you're going to have a projection of energy. And it's necessary for our people to be in a higher state of mind to handle mentally the energies that they're being already hit with right now and prepared for, which is another motivation, again, while we're going over the Black Code, so that the people can recognize that this paradigm, that the support paradigms that go or that have been conjoined with the Christian Black Codes that have been operating in society are collapsing. They're falling apart. So you can look at them and look at the bridge of this whole paradigm burning, but not cling to it. Observe it, learn from it, learn not to allow it to occur again on any human, Asiatic, African, or even the hybrid Europeans, and comprehend that whereas we may take choices in or relative to the energies that we have within ourselves to help make things better at Midgard. And whereas we have neglected our responsibilities, because we also have treaty with the universe. You got to understand. You got to understand and comprehend this. You have obligations, and where we failed, it's no problem, but it's no problem at the same time because the sun's going to clean this mess up anyway. So the more harmonic we are with reality, the more capable we'll be able to not be distracted by the paradigms or the constructs of the Piscean priesthood that are still operatively in power, but they're being dismantled on multiple levels. And so again, Christian Black codes, which are really the Constantinopolitan Creed operations hiding behind the name Christianity that have been operating at North America. So being cognizant of that changes, gives one the opportunity not to waste your energy on fake arguments like we've been telling people for years. Don't get caught up in the fake race argument that has been promoted, particularly since the adaptation by the priesthood of the Carlos Linnaeus and Blumenbach psychosis of the phenotype constructs to divide humanity and also to hide some of the reality of the hybrid origins of the what we would call albions. And that doesn't mean all of them. It just means from among them, you have many of the dark priesthood who have been using dark magic to conquer the world, and it's actually been holding humanity back. Many of their energies and many of their platforms are being removed in order to liberate humanity. And this thanks goes out to many of the humans at Midgard and with some outside help. Because remember, the rule in this particular solar system, and my note is that fundamental rule is operative universally, is that for the most part, we have no interference without our free will to it or without asking. We've been allowed to evolve for the most part on our own. However, we have had some what you would call negative interjections that have taken place that have caused problems for everyone. So the closer we get to the principle of love, and the more we're willing to forgive ourselves honestly, and usually, and then really start using our divine mind and trusting our intuitive mind, much of the cure will come from yourselves. Really, you know, we're looking for this outside remedy, and it's not exactly like you're getting some help, but it ain't exactly like that. It's only influence to get you to simply grow and come out of your shells. That's us. So let's go into the Christian Black Codes of 1724 that have been adopted into the corporate states thereafter, and particularly around the middle 1800s and enforced. And this has much to do with the present time political parties that have been operating at Midgard across the planet. So most people, when they're thinking about the Republican Party and the Democratic Party operating at North America, they're thinking, for the most part, that those jurisdictional operations are limited to North America. Well, let me tell you, they're not, and they weren't. They just come under different names from around the world, and they have entrenched themselves on the planet, and they have been causing quite a few problems that are being addressed. Don't think that they're not. However, the more cognizant you are of what's going on, the more capable you are of making discernment and separating the wheat from the chaff. Christian Black Codes, 1724. Now, the Union Colony States, which you know as the United States, which is their private corporation of the Pope of Rome, that has been promoted falsely as the country for a couple hundred years, actually. It's bankrupt. So let's put that on the table already, so you comprehend what's going on. And even many of the activities that are coming from the persons who are claiming to be on the board of directors, like the Congress and the Senate for that corporation, which are really board of directors for that dead corporate entity, which is really an extension of the Spanish Inquisition, of unum sanctum and doctrine of discovery exercises. So the Union Colony of States award their agent organizations, that's the corporate entities, with a release of tithe tax exemption status that you know of as the IRS's 501c3. And the question to you all, one is this: how and where does the foreign people, hybrid Europeans, and their private corporate government derive power and authority to tax Aboriginal and indigenous natural peoples of the land, Moors? And where did the colonial state persons derive their authority to determine tax or to deny taxation or on or over the Aboriginal and indigenous Moors of North America? And the taxing of the Aboriginal indigenous peoples, the Moors, is certainly not written in their constitution adopted from Anansi Confederation, nor from the treaties between Morocco, Great Britain, and the U.S. corporation operations of trade. Now, who should pay taxes to Caesar? But those who belong to Caesar. And why should any organization receive tax-exempt status for their assistance in your enslavement? And our people, the Moors, who are labeled black, Negro, colored, etc., will never see the light of freedom, never see the light of liberty, will never see the light of justice.